Have you ever thought about what goes on in your mind when you're not actually thinking about what's going on in your mind? All the things that happen without us consciously being aware of them. And I'm not just talking about the physical things like running blood through your body or pumping your heart or moving your shoulders. I just shrugged my shoulders, moving that. I'm talking about the time that you realize that you're singing in the car, the time that you realize that you've been on autopilot driving, the time that you realize that even though you're trying to eat healthy, that you just walked past a cookie, picked it up and ate it. Habits, both the good ones and the bad ones, are by definition unconscious. If that's the case, how do we see them? How do we change them? How do we make better habits? My name is Amber Fuhriman, and this is the More Than Corporate Podcast. Welcome to the More Than Corporate Podcast. I'm Amber Fuhriman, recovering perfectionist and serial accomplisher. If you're anything like I used to be, you've been living your life thinking that if you accomplish enough stuff, you'll finally find the success you've always wanted. But what if it's not about accomplishing more stuff? What if it's about accomplishing the right stuff? I believe you don't find success. You create it by intentionally designing the life you want and having the courage to get out of your comfort zone to live your design. I went from doing what I was supposed to do to doing what I love to do, and now I get to help others do the same. Keep listening as I chat with inspiring people who make it their mission to live their best life every day and learn how you too can live the life you've always wanted. Before we dig into this topic, just a quick reminder that this podcast is brought to you by Success Development Solutions and the Design Your Life Mastermind. If you are ready to really build the blueprint to the life that you've always wanted and have the support to create what you know is possible, reach out in the Calendly link that is going to be underneath this video or in the podcast and schedule a call. Let's connect and see how we can work together. So this idea of topics. First of all, I'm live streaming this in the community page, the Success Center community page. If you are wanting to be involved in the conversation, if you want to have first access to these topics and these videos, if you want to be able to give some feedback on what you'd like to hear next, head over to Facebook and join the Success Center community. We would love to have you as a part of that wonderful group of people. Habits, what are they? How do we change them? How do we become aware of them? This is a really interesting topic to me because so much of what I talk about is being intentional and making intentional choices and intentional actions. So with that being said, if we're talking about habits being unconscious, yet these intentional actions are so important, how do those two things go together? I'm rereading Atomic Habits by James Clear. And, we've said in past episodes, you never hear the same song twice because you're a different person the second time that you hear it than you were the first time that you heard it. Well, the same thing applies to reading a book. You never read the same book twice because by the time you read it a second time, you've changed what you think is important, who you are, your values, your perspective of the world. That's all changed. So you never read the same book twice. If you never read the same book twice, then you can get different things from each part of the book that you didn't get before. So what are habits? I'm reading this book, James Clear, and he really starts to dig into the fact that habits are those things that happen when we're not thinking about what's going on. It's the things that have been so ingrained to who we are that they have become completely unconscious to us, that they happen without us consciously thinking that they should happen. And these are created through all kinds of experiences that we have. We are either trying to move towards pleasure or away from pain. So we realize that something either gives us something that we're looking for or it takes away something that we don't want. And so we want to recreate that behavior because all our mind wants to do is please us and be able to create the response that we initially had. As this goes on and on and on and on, then new habits are created. And it's really, really interesting to me because one of the things that really popped up in this idea of habits was how can you be aware or how can you change your habits if you don't know what they are? And if they're completely unconscious, then how do we know what they are? In his book, Atomic Habits, James Clear has this idea of a scorecard, a habit scorecard. And he encourages you to write down everything that happens in the morning, everything that happens throughout the day. What happens when you get up? What are the first actions that you take, the second actions that you take, the third actions that you take, and so forth. And then once you're able to see that, and you start to see where the patterns are appearing and where the habits are appearing, then starting to grade those habits by putting a positive sign next to habits that move you closer to your goal, putting a negative sign with habits that move you further away from your goal, and putting an equal sign to habits that you really have no opinion about. They just are. So when you start doing this and you start to see, oh, there's a positive thing that I'm doing here, there's a negative thing that I'm doing here. One of the most important things that he says in the book is to make sure that you're not judging yourself for that. You're not celebrating the positive habits and you're not giving yourself a hard time for the negative habits. The purpose of this exercise is to allow you to see what your habits are. Once you see what they are, then you can start to change them. Once you make the unconscious conscious, then you can start to say, does this really serve me? Until then, it's just the way it is, right? One of the really founding individuals of neurolinguistics programming and this mindset idea is Carl Jung. And he says that the unconscious until you bring it to the consciousness will always dictate your future, and you'll call it fate. Once we can bring this into our consciousness, we can start to really intentionally make choices to change, to create new habits, to choose not to sing in the car. I don't know why you would ever want to choose not to do that, but if that doesn't move you towards your goal. As a music nerd, I find myself doing this all the time. To choose not to eat the food that's going to move you further away from a fitness goal. To choose to have actions that are going to move you closer to your business and profit and entrepreneurial goals, to intentionally choose actions that are going to move you closer to the goals that you want to have with your family. How do we create these if we're not even aware of what's happening? I've mentioned in prior episodes when it comes to goal setting that knowing exactly where you're starting is the most important part. And we've talked about the GPS example, right? So if you get in your car and you have this destination in mind, you know exactly where you want to go. And then you say, okay, well, I'm just going to get in my car. My car is going to take me there. You don't turn on your GPS. You've never been to this destination before. You don't really know how to get there. And you have this thing that's going to lay out for you all the possible steps and all the routes and now all the roadblocks and construction and detours that you need to make. You have it right there in front of you. If you don't turn it on, what are the chances of you meeting your destination? Secondly, if somebody's giving you instructions on how to meet your destination, but they're not in the same place that you are, then how valuable are those instructions if you're not taking that into consideration? So sticking with the GPS example, if we are wanting to go to Arizona, for example, my path to Arizona from Nevada is going to be completely different than somebody's path to Arizona from, say, New York. This is something that knowing your starting point, knowing exactly what it is where it is that you're at is so important. And your habits are the same way. How do you know what to change? How do you know what tiny behavioral changes will make a huge difference if you haven't really taken the time to understand where it is you are now and what you're doing? How do we create these new habits and how do we get rid of old habits? if we haven't actually taken the time to understand what our actions are right now and what the purpose of those actions are. Because let's be real, when we are considering when we make a choice, we're making that choice because we believe, again, that it moves us closer to a goal or further away from something that we don't want to have. So if we sit back and say, well, what's the real purpose of this? Let's take the money, for example. Let's take the I'll be happy when moment that we talk about so often. This I'll be happy when moment in my generation, it was 6 figures. I know that was my I'll be happy when moment. 6 figures income and everything's going to work out okay. So if we would have instead said, what is it that you think 6 figures is going to bring you? Then you have an answer to that. Is it prestige? Is it success? Is it respect? Is it freedom? Like, what is it that you think 6 figures brings you? And how do we then say, okay, does it actually bring you this? And if so, how do we move towards it? Is there something else that brings you those same feelings? Like, we get tunnel vision so much because we think X equaled Y, so it must always equal Y, right? $100,000 equaled in our minds respect, freedom, whatever it was. So it must always equal that. And it can be the only thing that equals that. So when we step back and say, what is the true goal? What is the true destination? Where is it that we really want to go? And what gets us there? In last week's episode, I talked to you guys about the importance of setting goals that are not only specific, but also that are identity-based instead of action-based, or identity-based instead of results-based. So let's stick in this fitness area where I'm living so much of my time right now. If my goal is to lose 80 pounds, 86 pounds is my goal. If my goal is to lose 86 pounds, then I can set a goal that I want to lose 86 pounds, but how successful am I going to be? Whereas if I say somebody who weighs what I want to weigh, who are they? What actions do they have? What habits do they have? What things do they do on a regular basis? And then how do I do those things? How do I become the person who has the results that I want to have? This is exactly the conversation about habits. Once you know the answer to that question, once you know the answer to the person who has what I want to achieve, what does their life look like? What does their identity look like? Who are they? What does it seem like a day in their life is like? And once you know the answer to those questions, okay, what do I need to do now in order to create that? And how do I intentionally do it? We're going to really dig into this. I'm going to share my progress with this second reading through of Atomic Habits because I think that it is extremely important. So as we go through this, we're going to be able to answer those questions. I would highly suggest, if you want, that you also go get the book. If this idea of habits and identity-based habits is something that is so foreign to you, this book just breaks it down into a way that is fantastic. Also, if the idea of having somebody walk you through things like this, walk you through books like this, and talk about ways to implement this into your life, to get perspectives on what somebody took from a book, what you're taking from a book, and be able to share that. I've created a program specifically for that purpose. There will be, again, a Calendly link underneath this video that you can click on so that we can connect and see if that's a good fit for you. All these intentional actions create habits. You know, the more we do something intentionally, the more we do it unconsciously. And then it becomes a habit. And that applies to the good things, and it applies to the things that don't necessarily serve our goals. So what I really wanted to focus on in today's podcast is really getting you to think. Utilize that idea of that habit scorecard that James Clear talks about in Atomic Habits. Write down what it is that you do every single day when you wake up. What does your day look like? And then being able to say, okay, does this actually move me closer to my goal? Does this move me further away from my goal? Does this serve where I want to go and what I want to accomplish? If the answer is no, then how do you change it? If the answer is yes, how do you do more of it? That awareness is the very, very first step to making any type of change. Always remember, guys, that you have the ability to design the life that you've always wanted, but it requires intentional action. It requires you to step in and intentionally build the blueprint to the life that you've always wanted. And then it also requires you to surround yourself with people and tools and resources that will help you not only execute that blueprint, but have the confidence to step into that uncomfortable zone so that you can have everything that you've always wanted. This has been the More Than Corporate podcast. I'm Amber Fuhriman. I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the More Than Corporate podcast. If anything that was said during this episode resonated with you or provided value in any way, it would mean the world to me if you would head over to iTunes and leave a rating and review for the More Than Corporate podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to do that. I'm really looking forward to connecting with you. If you'd also like to connect, I've created a Facebook group that is full of amazing people who also make it their mission to live their best life every single day. If that sounds like something that you're interested in, the name of that Facebook group is Success Center. Head over there, request to join, and I look forward to connecting with you soon.